It's time for us to go and take a look at the Nintendo Wii U and see how this particular gaming console holds up in 2024. Now, the craziest thing going on for this particular console is that there is still, I would say, a lot of legacy and legendary impact that this particular gaming console has had for the last several years. The craziest thing is, when you look at the Nintendo Wii U, you probably already know about all the failures of this console, all the problems and issues that it had, but if we take a look at the Nintendo Switch, you probably already know this. There is still so much, overlap between the Nintendo Wii U and the Nintendo Switch. And it's actually kind of interesting because after every almost massive success that Nintendo makes, they sometimes have a big pitfall. They sometimes have a big failure. If you look at the GameCube that came off the Nintendo 64, if you look at the Nintendo Wii U that came off the Nintendo Wii. So this has always been probably one of the, black sheeps or one of the biggest failures Nintendo has probably ever faced. It's a very, very weird console, but I do think it was a very good console, and I actually like this console a lot. I don't like the console itself, but I like the games that platform on this console. I like the idea of it, and you have to remember, if we never got the Nintendo Wii U, we would have probably never gotten the Nintendo Switch. So we do have to kind of remember that type of aspect to it. But when looking at the Nintendo Wii U, there is still, I would say, a lot to love about this console. And if you're planning on buying it, I would probably say just go ahead, save your money, and just go buy a Nintendo Switch. In fact, these Nintendo Wii U's have been only going up in the used market quite a bit. So if you have a Wii U, you could probably keep it or just, retain it for a little bit and then sell it whenever you don't need it anymore, or sell it when the Switch successor comes out. And then you might be able to buy a Switch successor depending on that price for a used price of a Nintendo Wii U. So on the exterior of the Nintendo Wii U, this was kind of like a hybrid portable console, not really. So this essentially, as most of you know, it was a dedicated, console that you had plugged into your TV, but it was also a dedicated gamepad as well. So as long as you were in the vicinity of your particular, gaming console, you were able to go ahead, pick up your Nintendo Wii U, mess around with it, use it as you normally would, and it was a pretty cool experience. I was a very big fan of the Wii U, but I didn't really even know it was a gaming console, separate. I thought it was an extension to the Wii, and it's funny, so many people had that same exact thought process as well, and I generally thought, it's so crazy how much I thought that, because usually I'm pretty, I know technology a little bit, I talk about technology all the time, and even I, back then, had a hard time understanding it, but at this point, I totally get it. I think it was actually a pretty decent way of Nintendo kind of getting into a handheld gaming console kind of situation. They already made the Nintendo 3DS, they already made the DSi and DSi XL, but I'm sure they didn't want to make a dedicated other gaming console that was portable, because they didn't want to cannibalize the sales of the 3DS. But this approach on paper actually makes a lot of sense. By having a portable gaming console that was tied to a gaming console, you had to plug into your TV, it's not like you could take this thing on the go. That's exactly what Nintendo wanted. That way you would be more inclined to go ahead and buy a Nintendo 3DS. That way they wouldn't have to go ahead and have to, kind of be competitors within themselves. With the 3DS, there really wasn't any competition. Maybe you had the PlayStation Vita, but really the main competition the 3DS had was basically mobile gaming. And the 3DS had a rocky start, but it did really well later on. The Wii U had a rocky start and a rocky beginning and a rocky ending and a rocky middle. It was rocky all over the place. But I do think for the most part, the that separate of the gaming console, portable gaming, not really hybrid of this particular console, on paper seemed good, but it was not executed that well. Now, the cool thing about the Wii U was that it was backwards compatible with all the Nintendo Wii games. And I think that is actually a very, very cool thing. It had that disc tray, so you could just plug in all the Wii games that you wanted to within this console, which was a very good thing going on for this particular device. And I do think that in and of itself was another really cool thing going on here. And the Wii U was a, monstrously more powerful console as far as we could tell from the Wii. The Wii was just slightly more, powerful than the GameCube, but the Wii U was a lot more powerful than the, Wii. So it's a lot more, it can play HD games. This was their first dedicated HD console, and because of that, they had a lot of different, things they had to do with this particular device. But you have to remember that this was, a little bit of a learning lesson from Nintendo. With their first, as far as I know from the research I've done, their first, release of games that kind of came out for this particular device really wasn't that great. They had games, they had some good stuff here and there, but for the most part, their first batch of games that came out for the Wii U, it wasn't really that massive. And their actual main titles that they had, the Mario game of that time and these other games at that time too, they weren't really massive, selling points for people to go ahead and buy this console. When you look at the Nintendo Wii, that gaming console had so many legendary titles in it. I mean, you look at, all the Marios that came out, the Mario Kart that came out for that, console, which was, not people's favorite, but it was still very, very, it sold very well. Lots of, games across the board, including that Animal Crossing. A Super Smash Brothers came out for that, console. But developers wanted to make games for that console because so many people had that console in their house. So even game developers who had a very powerful game, I think Call of Duty and all this other stuff, they had to make a kind of a smaller version of that game to run on Wii because they wanted to be able to take advantage of all those people who had a Wii. With the Wii U, it was completely different. People, even though it was more powerful than the Wii, people just didn't really have this gaming console, in their hands. They just couldn't go ahead and actually even if they made the game, there's only going to be a few million people who would even have the chance of even playing it versus other developers in other, areas, even Android, tablets at the time. You put up a game onto the Play Store, tens of millions of people are going to be able to see it at that time. So it was a little bit of a different experience. And I do think because of that, Nintendo took a pretty big L here. They just had a lot of competition, and with the mixture of the competition and this console not doing that well, it was just a perfect storm for this console not to do that well. Now, I will say the display of this thing still looks pretty good. It's not a terrible console, but you can definitely tell this thing looks a little bit outdated. But I bring this up because, like I said, the Nintendo Wii U had to fail, I guess, in a way, for the Nintendo Switch to actually go and kind of, be the top of the top. I mean, the Nintendo Switch is a killer. It is a very, very good console, but even that console was kind of underpowered when it first came out. With the Nintendo Wii U, it's a little bit of a different story. This console was actually pretty powerful when it first came out, and it just kind of kept that same way. It was a very powerful console, but the problem with this device was that, nobody really bought it because they already had a Nintendo Wii. Nintendo did a very poor job marketing this thing, but I still think because of that, this console is kind of I would say the legacy of this console is going to be much better than the actual current, when this thing was first initially released. I would say from all the bad that this console had, you still had a lot of really good games that came out for this particular device. You had Super Mario 3D World. That was a really good, game. You had all those Nintendo Wii games that you could play. You had kind of a new Animal Crossing a little bit. You had Super Smash Brothers for Wii U, which was arguably at that time the best looking Super Smash Brothers at that time, which was very, very nice. You had a lot of new IP as well, like Super Mario Maker came out for this particular device. And towards the end of it, you did have, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild that came out for this console as well, which is actually some legendary stuff. For this console to have that kind of stuff at that time, it's very cool. And I do think at that moment, it was a very, very good thing going on for this particular, gaming console. So I would tell you at the end of the day, I look at something like the Nintendo Wii U and I'm happy about it. I definitely do think with the Nintendo Wii U, when it first came out, clearly it wasn't that great. But towards the end of its life cycle, I definitely do think this thing grew to be a pretty good console. And I think towards the end of it, clearly this thing wasn't really doing that well. But because of this console, you were able to get something on the Nintendo Switch. And I do think this in and of itself deserves a lot of credit for the success of that next generation console. So in terms of that kind of covers it up here. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.